Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can see our presentation. And let's go into our slideshow mode. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome. So glad you guys are here joining us on this Friday in Ohio. Lovely weather today, cannot complain. Um, we know that cell phone use and navigating that as adults can be very tricky. We didn't grow up with cell phones. So learning those boundaries is very important for adults when we lean and rely heavily on technology, not only for our careers and for our work life, but also personally. And so kind of understanding the statistics and the research that has been put into this for how to create healthy boundaries is what we want to share with you guys today. So we know as adults it can be challenging. Think about for our teens. So we are sharing information, stats, and tips with you today, just so we can be aware that we know that sometimes there are complexities that make it challenging to navigate our everyday lives with the technology use. We are not trying to be hypocrites, not at all. Again, many of us are figuring out this balance. So please do not think that we are perfect. We are all, we're figuring this out together. It's a place of learning, growing, and improving for all of us. So thank you for sharing your time with us today. Just a quick plug. We kicked off our Lunch and Learn series last month in September. This month, of course, we're talking about cell phones, and then our next Lunch and Learn will be November 15th, and that will be on executive functioning. So tune in for that. It'll be at noon, and a Zoom link will be sent out to you the morning of.
Hi everyone. I'm Brianna Abbott. I'm one of the counselors. I work with students in the top part of the alphabet. And so when we're talking about our cell phones, the reality is we rely on our phones for so many things. It's not just a phone, and it's not just the internet. It's our map, it's our phone book. Kids today, if you ask them, what's your parents' phone number, they don't know. They have to look it up. A lot of times they don't even know their address. They have it saved in their phone. Um, Obviously, our calculators, our cameras. We do so many things with our phone as our tool and not just thinking about it as being something that we use to get on for a phone call or even just for the internet. It fills a lot of other roles in our lives with that advent of smartphones. And so, there are good things about phones. They help us stay connected to our loved ones and get us important information quickly and easily and having access to emergency services. But then, go to the next slide, please. So while she works on getting to the next slide, the phones do also help us in, and the challenge is then figuring out if it's a healthy approach and how we're using our phones or if it's unhealthy. And this is something that is prevalent for kids today, but it's also something that can be an issue for us as adults. And the reality is it sometimes can be hard to figure out, is this a healthy use or an unhealthy use? And they are definitely powerful tools that can do incredible things, a lot like cars. These aren't toys, these are tools. And so we don't want to think of it as a reward that we get to use our phone. We want to think of it in a lot of ways, that tool, like that car. When you think about a car, it's a powerful and it's useful. It gets us from point A to point B, but it takes responsibility and focus and I said responsibility already, but that ability to know that this tool of a car can also be dangerous. If I run into a pole or a person, those are scary things. And our phones aren't going to let me run into a pole or anything like that, but it can also be a wonderful tool, but it could also do great harm. And so when you're looking at that balance between healthy and unhealthy use, it's not a one size fits all. It talks on here about, on the slide, about it's like your food consumption, and that foods are not all good or all bad, and there's moderation. And so, being able to figure out what your truly healthy diet looks like is going to have that balance of different things. And so with technology, you're in that same dynamic. And so trying to find that balance for individually and for families is important. People are on their phones for lots of reasons. Obviously, social media has been a major driver behind part of why people are on their phones a lot. 81% of Americans use social media, and that's a big reason that people are checking their phones frequently. Common Sense Media did a survey of teens that said, and over 50% of the kids that responded to the survey said that they are on social media constantly. Not often, but constantly. Over 50% of teens. It is their place of connection. And so they are always on it at some level, a lot of times. Phones are a big thing because we have that fear of missing out. We think we could be missing out on some important news, something that's happening with a friend, or some change in circumstances. We have that fear that we're going to miss something. I think in a little bit we'll talk some about how often we tap our phones or look at our phones, even if we didn't get a notification. We have that fear that we could be missing out on something. When we're getting those notifications, you get that you get that alert that somebody has sent you a message. It also creates a chemical reaction in our brains. So we get a dopamine release every time we get that notification. And dopamine is that neurotransmitter in our brains that's connected to pleasure and reward. And so every time your phone dings, you get that burst of dopamine. And so that creates a cycle where we then crave more of that. And we want those messages, we want those notifications. Obviously, boredom is a part of it. I'm sure that all of you as adults, I know me as an adult, have had times where I'm bored. I'm sitting in line, I'm standing there. I don't want to just sit there and be bored. And so I'll hop on my phone. Sometimes it's more of a habit aspect. I know I've seen this again. I fully acknowledge that it's me too, where I might be in an app and I close out of it and I immediately open it again because I'm not doing it mindfully. I'm doing this out of habit. I'm making that click because that's what I typically do. I mentioned social media as being a big factor for why people are on their phones today, teens in particular. And I do want to clarify, social media is not an all good or all bad. It has complicated our lives. It's changed dynamics in lots of ways, in part because we are comparing our behind the scenes with everybody else's highlight reels. We know how messy our lives look. We know how complicated and challenging our days can be. And yet, when we are looking at other people's information that they are sharing on social media, it all looks perfect. And so then when we're comparing ourselves to these perfect images, we have that tendency to feel like we're falling short. If you're interested in learning more about social media and the impact that social media has on us as humans, there is a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, and that would be a great thing to watch either for you as parents or to watch as a whole family and then discuss it as a family. It was a really eye-opening show to watch, I think, for all of us counselors when we were talking about it after the fact. But because social media does have some advantages, like the strong friendships or being exposed to diverse opinions and perspectives, and it can give the opportunity to make some connections, even though it also has some really negative outcomes, it can be challenging in the research studies to figure out where this impact is actually having on kids' lives. So a lot of their research has been on whether or not it's an active engagement on social media versus a passive engagement. Active engagement would be like I'm sending direct messages to my friends, or making those connections using my social media tools. Whereas passive might be the doom scrolling, just scrolling and mindlessly watching content without it being meaningful to me. But at the same time, that active and passive piece that's at play isn't the only thing that makes it good or bad, because I can actively be trolling in Reddit, and that's not a positive outcome. And I can passively be watching an educational video or documentary, and that's not a negative. And so it's really hard for the researchers to get their arms completely wrapped around where that problematic use comes in, and how to try and watch it, because when they identify that it's problematic use, they know that it's got lots of negative effects like moodiness and anxiety, and um and so there's just a balance that has to come with everything, but including social media. I'm not going to go through all of these statistics, but there are tons and tons and tons of stats that are out there about how often we're using our phones. And there's varying facts based upon how recent or far back some of the data is. I think it's fascinating that, 71% of people sleep with their phones next to their beds, and 35% of those are checking their phones within the first 5 minutes of waking up. People who use smartphones check their phones on average of 100, or turn on their phones, unlock their phones. That's the word I'm looking for. On average of 150 times a day, and 86% are doing that even while they're in conversation with family or friends. So that personal connection, those opportunities where I'm talking to a family member or talking to a friend, can get disrupted by a phone. That I can pick it up, I can check it while I'm talking to you, which then sends a message, subtle message, unintended message, I am absolutely certain, that you're not as important to me. The person who is before me isn't as important to me as a person who maybe is out there doing something on their phone. And then this is perfect. People are using their phones even when they're going to the toilet. We're using our phones in all of these different times. Touching our phones over 2,600 times a day. And this is in part coming from these teen and parent statistics. I think, and it's a little bit hard to see on here. We'll have links at the end for you. But the information that's in that yellow box is really what I think is terrifying. That teens who spend 5 or more hours on their phones per day, which is unfortunately the majority of teens today, are 71% more likely to exhibit suicide risk factors. And so we want to make sure that we're doing things that are helping to protect kids, as well as us as adults, as we navigate how to go through life with cell phones. And then the last slide I'm going to share a little bit about is just one more thing about statistics for all of us on here. Mrs. Mann mentioned we're that generation that didn't have this. We didn't have our every moment captured on video or shared out with others. If I tripped down the stairs when I was in high school, it would have been embarrassing in that moment. I would have been mortified for sure. But after a few days, it would be done. For teens today, unfortunately, it's not usually just done, because it might be captured on video. It's going to be posted about, it's going to be talked about on social media. And so it just creates a different dynamic for kids today and what they're experiencing than what any of us had when we were growing up. And so it also changes how peers interact with them, with one another, and how they feel about themselves. And that's a really important element for us to be thinking about.
When we talk about the introduction of cell phones into our day-to-day, into school, I mean, students bringing cell phones to school, I remember when I was in high school, I couldn't even bring a pager to school, right? There would be a lot of consequences. So now we're kind of meshing together this thought of a student bringing a cell phone, which it is important to be connected to parents, but there has to be some sort of light shone on the fact that it does impact our mental health. There was a study conducted by the University of Illinois. They found that high frequency cell phone users, I'm willing to say that's a lot of our high schoolers, high frequency cell phone users experience greater levels of anxiety and lower levels of happiness than those who use their cell phone less frequently. That makes sense because there is something that is impacting our brain when we feel that constant need to check and then compare our lives to what is portrayed on social media or checking in with friends and seeing that they're doing this and I'm just at home studying. Another study that was done by the American Psychological Association found that constantly checking your phone can lead to chronic stress, which can negatively impact our mental health as well. If we have that constant need, I got to check, I got to see, even though a notification's not happening. Among adults who almost constantly are using their phone, it was reported that 25% are feeling more nervous or anxious, 20% are feeling lonely or isolated, 18% are feeling overwhelmed, 17% are feeling depressed or unhappy with their life. So there are these studies, and those statistics that I just read came from the Pew Research Center. And if this is the case for adults, right? Because that one is the adults who shared that information. What's happening to our teens? How can we help put up some borders, some boundaries to help our teens navigate cell phone usage in a way that will not impact their mental health? So if we also look at smartphones on the brain, we know, and the research has shown us, that it does change the brain chemistry. There's that dopamine hit. There is something in our brain that it's making it an addiction to constantly check the cell phone or be on the cell phone, which can also negatively impact the cognitive ability. We're not functioning on all of our cylinders. You've heard that expression. I'm not firing on all my cylinders today. It's when we are constantly being distracted and it's hard for us to focus on one task at hand. It decreases our sustained attention. And when we have those constant interruptions and alerts or the notifications or the Apple Watch that's buzzing on our wrist, then those are symptoms that can contribute to ADHD and other attention disorders that makes it more challenging for us to be present and focusing on our day-to-day life. So there are some disrupting factors. There will be a page at the end of our presentation that has all of the resources that we use for this PowerPoint and some for you to look through. It will be all of our resources, but we'll give you just a couple more data points that, and I found this one interesting. After a distraction, like a cell phone notification, buzzing on your wrist, buzzing on your phone, it takes anywhere from a few minutes to 23 minutes to get back into refocus and have new sustained focus on what you were working on previously. So if I was working on an email and I had a notification pop up on my phone and I looked at it, it would take me minutes to be able to focus back at the task at hand. Few to 23 minutes, that's huge. That research says a lot. And if this is, each student, our periods are 45 minutes. If students are checking their cell phone during a 45-minute math period, think of how more difficult it is for them to get back to working on and learning the concept of something like math. But that can be relatable for all of the classes that our students are taking. So there are warning signs. How do we know? Can we recognize the signs of a cell phone addiction in ourselves so then we can also help our teenage students? As excessive phone use has become normalized in our society, we've got to be able to detect some of these warning signs of when this is becoming not as useful, but kind of going into it's becoming a problem. So there are some red flags that you'll want to watch for and to indicate that there might be a problem. I think one of the main ones is if you feel like you always have to have your cell phone and you're constantly checking it, that becomes an unhealthy relationship with the phone. If you have difficulty on cutting back on phone use, neglecting responsibilities, homework's not getting done, studying's not getting done because you're so focused on scrolling or watching a movie or communicating with friends, then that also becomes a problem. Spending more time on your phone than you originally intended, that one goes to say. But I think one of the biggest ones on this next slide I want to talk about is that decrease in in-person socialization. We use our social skills. Our humans are social beings, and we need that direct contact with one another. And it's frightening to go out into the commons and see a table at lunch and they're not communicating with each other because they're looking down on their phones. Or on the weekends, this is high school. Kids want to go out and get food together or go to the football game together. If you are noticing that your student is wanting to stay home and just be in their room on their phone, that's a red flag that this has now become an unhealthy relationship with the phone, and some boundaries need to be put into place.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Schnell, one of the other counselors, and I know we've thrown a lot of like information, data, scary stuff your way. So we also want to instill some hope and give some like tangible things that like you can do in this moment, like starting right now, to maybe help set boundaries and be a little bit more proactive, in both your student's life and your own life, with how we use technology. So, as Mrs. Mann mentioned, one of the biggest worries is when screen use becomes a default behavior, especially when it encroaches on that time when we really should be connecting with each other. And also, boredom is okay. We're allowed to be bored. Sometimes it's nice to be bored. Sometimes I wish I could be bored. Um, and that space is really great for creativity to flow and things like that. So there are a few things that we can do to help be proactive and preventative. So experts say that one thing that parents can control most is our own phone use. And that can be super powerful influence on teens' relationships with technology and their own phones. So it can be helpful to consider implementing some of these tips in our own use to help model some of that behavior. So some examples, setting boundaries and creating specific times for, technology and phones to be set aside, maybe family dinners or certain hours of the day before bedtime, those kinds of things. But boundaries around phones are super helpful and important to create times for like detox, quote unquote, from technology and make that time for human connection. We read one tip actually that stated if your teen wants to download a new app or a new game or something like that, have them write a one-page report about the app, like its data tracking, its privacy settings. Have there been any concerns or scandals around that app? We personally love that one. I think that's pretty awesome. So that's something you could do as well. So we know technology and phones aren't going away, right? So when considering what expectations to place, make sure that they're reasonable and also achievable for both you and your whole family. So moving on to the next slide, other things that might be helpful to include maybe different settings on your phone and consider those settings. So you can always access the do not disturb setting to silence any notifications if you or your teen are feeling like that's distracting and you see your phone light up and you like want to tap it and see what that notification is. There's also a way, we actually just had a department meeting the other day to learn about this. There's also a way to mute colors on your screen because sometimes like the bright colors and that kind of stuff can be really engaging for like Instagram or even just our background in apps. So you can actually turn on what's called grayscale, and it's super easily Googleable with your like steps. So if that's something that would be helpful for your teen or yourself, that's something to consider. If there are things on your phone or even like accounts on Facebook, Instagram, whatever social media is, happening in your family, feel free to like identify those apps or those accounts or whatever that are not bringing joy versus are bringing joy. And we have the power to unfollow or delete or restrict those apps or accounts. And it might even be a cool opportunity for you and your family to come together and like talk to your teen about that and reflect as a family. What part of technology is actually serving us and being helpful, and what's actually harmful that we're not even realizing is harmful, but taking away from our joy or our time together. And setting aside that time with your family to really reflect and see if there are appropriate limits that you can set and all agree to. So also just I've kind of mentioned this already, but having dedicated screen time, or non-screen time, I'm sorry, every day is a key recommendation. I know I've said that already, but truly no phones during certain activities and certain times, like at a family dinner or during bedtime or even during like family movies or games, is crucial to setting appropriate expectations. I know my daughter is not a teen, she's super young, but something that I'm working on, and I'm going to highlight working on. It's not something I've like mastered yet, but leaving my phone in a different room when she and I are playing together or having that quality time, because I would hate for her to feel like my phone is more important than her and our time together. So something to consider. Some families have made it a practice to even observe like a 24-hour like digital day off every now and again. And you can set that expectation as a family if it's every other week, if it's every week, is it every month, is it every quarter, where it's completely free of screens. So the catch is not only do teens have to do that, but parents also put their phones, tablets, smartwatches, laptops, all the screens away. Um, and seeing a parent put their technology and phone away is probably a lot more effective than just telling a kid to put the phone away, it's bad for you. So something else to consider, maybe a tip. And then moving on to the next slide, it can also be helpful to prioritize other activities that are more focused on face-to-face interactions or even movement, volleyball leagues, family outings, all of that stuff. So additionally, we can encourage us to take various apps, or parents to take various apps, take a look at those to see how you can limit, track, see what's happening on your child's phone. And then if you need mindfulness or stress management tips, we have those for you. And we also have a lot on our counselor website. So the biggest takeaway is really just making changes now, that will help make sure our futures are not, phones before people, and communication and interactions and face-to-face things are still a priority in our life. We acknowledge it's a challenge, but hopefully some of these tips feel accessible and feel manageable for you and your family. So, what questions do you have? I know this is probably one of our longer lunch and learns because it's relatively speaking a newer topic that are impacting not only us but our teens as well. So, what questions do you have? What can we answer for you? And also November 15th, executive functioning skills. We would love to see you there.
And while you're typing your questions into the chat, here is the last page with all of our sources and links to the resources that we used for this PowerPoint presentation. This will be on our counselor's website, so it'll be clickable and you'll have access to all of this. So I'm going to go back to this slide, but we'll get out of this. I'll stop sharing, and we can start answering some of the questions that you guys may have.
Yes. And again, if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we will read it and answer, hopefully.
And while we're waiting on you to do that, it was interesting to me, even as we were sitting here talking about cell phones and talking about it as people were, my other coworkers were talking, I found myself like having that desire, like even just hearing phone, 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 it made me want to grab my phone and be checking it. But our phones are also, my guess is probably for many, if not all of you, your phones are also within arm's reach of you right now. And I think that's a dynamic that we have happening for all of us. And I did see in the chat the question was about the social dilemma. It was very eye-opening to me, like just how much, of the research and the thought process of the things that they do when they're creating apps like that. It's definitely something worth watching if you haven't seen it yet. So there's a message in the chat saying, I like the suggestion of leaving the phone in another room when talking. A discouraging thing for me now, being a graduate of stationary phones, is to hold a discussion with my adult daughter while she's on her phone. Yeah, absolutely. Because it changes that dynamic of how, how we're talking to people, where our focus is when we're on our phones and talking to another person. And it's a big challenge.
We have not found out the results of that survey. I know that Dr. Bowers sent that survey out to all parents a couple of weeks ago, and they are looking at all of that data and research and will come up with a school policy based off of not only teacher input. I can't remember if it went out to students.
Yep,
Yes,
students
student
and parent
input and then
guardians.
community members. Yeah.
Yeah, and the research on it was very interesting of like some of the stuff they put out, the like preliminary results of that. Kids felt like they use their phones a lot for educational purposes. Um, they felt like they need access to their parents while they're at school. And that was another piece that was on there, and that desire for parents to have access to their kids. And then there were other parents that were like, no, I know that I can call the school if I needed to get to my child. And so, that was there too. So I'm very thankful that I'm not one of those high level decision makers that has to say, this is how we're going to do it. But I do, like Mrs. Mann just said, they are definitely looking at what everybody's input was and then trying to figure out how to best navigate that for kids. It's definitely something that we have seen the impact on students. When I was administering the end of course test last spring, when everybody was done testing, everybody had been super antsy until the last student was done testing, and then they all were given permission to grab their phones, and then literally no one moved and were dead silent. Before that, I was trying to get people to be quiet and to stay still, and then as soon as they got to have their phones, it was just like total focus back onto their phone. And so it's really changed the dynamic. My nephew is a freshman in college, and just the ability to try and meet new people and talk to people, like social media can be great. You can find out things that are happening, but to just like walk up and sit with someone in the cafeteria is hard because everybody's got AirPods in and looking down at a phone, and it changes the dynamics for our world. Other questions you guys have, we certainly want to make sure we answer. I know that we've already gone over on our time, but we do want to make sure that we answer any questions that you have. So if there's anything else that you're seeing or experiencing that you wanted to ask us, we're definitely willing to answer them. Okay.
We appreciate you guys being here. We will see you November 15th to talk about executive functioning skills.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Okay, stop our recording.